Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Growing more with less is the mantra of Nebraska's corn farmers, and they're using incredible technology to do it. Soil moisture monitors let them know when their crop needs water and how much. GPS systems eliminate overlaps in the field, saving fuel and money. New hybrids reduce the use of pesticides and increase yields. When you're talking new technology and innovation, Nebraska corn farmers are all ears. Nebraska's family corn farmers, sustaining innovation.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Elaine Kub explains how the strength of the U.S. dollar might impact exports. Richard Randle describes a few concerns to grazing cattle in cornstalks and soybean stubble. Alastair Stewart gives an overview on planting progress and a political election in South America. And Bruce Brodersen updates us on the porcine epidemic diarrhea virus. Elaine Kub is our corn and soybean market analyst this week. U.S. farmers are 3/4 complete harvesting this year's corn crop and 87% finished in soybeans. Both marks are 7 points ahead of the nation's 5-year average. The USDA in its October crop report said it's expecting growers will bring in nearly 13.6 billion bushels of corn and almost 3.9 billion bushels of soybeans for the 2015 harvest. Elaine joined us from South Dakota Thursday morning. We started by asking about harvest progress and results.
Well, I'm up in South Dakota this week, and we just the crew that I was working with driving grain cart for, we just finished yesterday, so that's good. I think we were a little earlier. I think there's, obviously still 10% left here in the state if you look at the USDA numbers. But overall, very good weather here, and this has been true throughout the Corn Belt, as nobody's really been suffering by any major rain delays. And so particularly with soybeans, this was almost a record fast pace. Those just got off really fast. And yet the industry has been able to handle it. We haven't seen any major disasters in the basis market or in the shipping problems. So no problems. This is a pretty ideal harvest.
Good yields?
Good yields here. Not record-breaking yields overall. And again, I think that echoes the entire Corn Belt. You're looking at spots where they did have spring problems. This has not been an ideal year for growing corn and soybeans. But in the places where they didn't have the problems and the rain just helped the grain, there are some spots where you probably do have absolutely farm record yields. But overall, this is not a nationwide record yield or record crop year.
Do you think the USDA then holds with its current expectations when it comes to the November 10th crop report?
Well, possibly. I think they probably won't make any more adjustments to the acreage because they've already factored that in. But because we've had such very good harvest reports from the yield for soybeans, there is a chance that they could raise the yield for soybeans again, which would be bearish to this market, but I think the market could withstand that. Otherwise, we're seeing pretty tight spreads, suggesting that the commercial market is not overwhelmed with supply. The export progress again this week was very, very high. In fact, a marketing year high in the actual shipments. Was it 2.8 million metric tons? So a very good pace and overall bullishness for soybeans that could withstand any sort of bearish tweak from the USDA.
You wrote on DTN this week about Europe, China, and the strength of the U.S. dollar. Just for perspective, tell me about the U.S. dollar and kind of where it stands right now.
Well, the U.S. dollar has had a wild week last week, and it wasn't really based on too much of the U.S.-based arguments. It was more of the euro itself falling. And even though our export products, our ag products that we're trying to ship out to foreign buyers, aren't really competing with euro-based or euro-denominated ag products too much. Some wheat exports we do compete with, but nevertheless, that has an effect on the dollar index, and so it has an effect on the grain futures trade. It's, the corn and the soybeans more so, but the corn and wheat really didn't respond to that higher dollar last week, and it's continued higher this week also. So it's been quite resilient, but it's really hard to say if we wouldn't be having more of a post-harvest or late harvest bounce here if these grains weren't having to fight against the headwinds from a continually higher dollar. And honestly, going forward in the months ahead, it's unlikely that the dollar is likely to go back down. I mean, we're not likely to see the Fed make any decisions that would bring the dollar down. They're only likely from this point forward to continue to be bullish to the dollar.
What impact would a change in interest rates have?
Well, it would be a confirmation that we are on the path that the Fed wants us to be, that the economy is stronger, and it would, like, again, only bring in more of the foreign investment and more of the bullish ideas that the U.S. economy is strong and the dollar should factor that in with a higher price. Is
this a long-term concern to exports, do you think?
It is, particularly when you look at the competition. I believe that Alastair is telling you this week that the Brazilian economy is not great. So you've got a Brazilian currency that is at a decade low, a Ukrainian currency that's a decade low, Canadian currencies at a decade low. Basically, all of our exporting partners, their currencies are very cheap, making their grain much more competitive on the export market, and I don't see any expectations for those situations to change. The only thing that's changing is our dollar getting stronger. So yeah, this is a long-term, or at least medium-term, headwind against the grains.
Okay, let's talk about your price outlooks for corn and soybeans. Let's start in corn. Where do you think corn moves to?
Well, I think we should be aiming for another 40 cents. And maybe not here by the end of the year, certainly, but you know, you expect to see a seasonal high in the spring, and I do expect to see these prices continue to recover somewhat just seasonally, or certainly if we see problems in South America, you know, you could start to get some bullishness in the row crop markets over the next few months. However, again, based on these dollar expectations and overall economic expectations, I would want to be sort of conservative with my hopes and my optimism here. Maybe only another 40 cents on corn, maybe another 70 cents on soybeans. So if you saw soybean futures, nearby soybean futures at 9.50, for instance, that would be a time to hit the sell button, in my opinion.
Anything on new crop that you think, or any price targets on new crop that you think you'd be willing to move at with a rally?
Well, I mean, again, just sort of a general sense that we should see a rally here after harvest going into the spring, but it would probably be somewhat limited. So again, that 40 cents, 70 cents, that's what I'm looking for.
Next week, University of Missouri Extension economist Ron Plain will join us to analyze hog markets. At the ARDC near Meade last week, we talked with UNL Extension beef veterinarian Richard Randle about things cattle producers can be doing to prepare for winter. Some of those animals are likely finding a new feed source, with the state's crop growers clearing corn and soybean fields. The latest USDA state report puts farmers 90% complete in soybeans and 57% finished in corn. But storms towards the end of the growing season might have knocked more corn and soybeans to the ground, and in some cases provided an opportunity for new plants to emerge. That could be a problem to grazing livestock. We started our discussion with Richard talking about foot rot, another issue to be aware of for cattle out in fields.
The things we always are concerned about, depending on the weather, what kind of weather we get, wet weather, get some mud, plus the sharp stalks and those kind of things can lead to damage to the foot and subsequently lead to foot rot. So we want to be pretty close watching those cows for any sign of early limping and those kind of things.
What's the treatment or remedy if you do notice anything?
Typically they're going to respond pretty well to antibiotics if you get to them early, and if there's any really low spots, low muddy spots, if you can get them out of that for a period of time, that's going to help.
What's the danger to grazing some stalks where maybe there was hail damage and you have some plant regrowth in there?
Well, there's 2 or 3 things that we have to consider there. If you get hail damage, there may be more of the actual corn grain on the ground than anticipated, and if they get too much of that, can lead to some acidosis problems. We've also heard of even some hailed beans, hailed-on beans, where the beans dropped and actually sprouted. And those young plants like that, the concern you'd have probably mostly is if we get a pretty good frost and a wilt on those, it could lead to some prussic acid problems. So if you get that, then you're going to want to hold them off that till a week or so till that can dissipate if you think there's going to be a problem there.
For producers that have, like what we do behind us, a fall calving herd, what are some things that they need to keep in mind here as we go into winter?
Obviously, you know, they're probably in the middle of that calving now, and the weather's good, and that's all great, but want to pay attention to dramatic sudden changes in the weather, especially extreme cold and wet can be pretty tough on those calves. So ensuring that they got a good dry area place, some shelter breaks from the inclement weather is going to be something we want to pay attention to.
What nutrient requirements does winter bring along with it?
Well, obviously we don't see that much more. If we get good fall weather, we like that. We have some pretty good fall grazing. Those cows are going to be probably in pretty good shape and deal with that. But then as we begin to get into that colder weather, that's going to require increased maintenance in those cows. So you got those cows with those new calves on their sides like that, you got to ensure that that energy and protein is going to be plenty adequate for those animals.
For the whole herd, are you looking at any culling options right now and trying to find some weaker animals before you go into winter?
Well, certainly, you know, it's a busy time of the year. We've been weaning calves, we're preg checking cows, so we certainly want to find those cows that are open so we can deal with those animals and move them out if necessary. Depending on what you have for winter feeding situations, there may be some short-bred cows, certainly those cows with short teeth, leg and udder problems, those kind of things. You certainly want to look at those as good candidates of potentially culling them and not having to deal with them through that winter feeding period.
UNL's beef website has more resources on herd health and grazing corn stalks. We'll link to that information on the Market Journal homepage. The October Nebraska Farmer says pork production is gradually increasing in Nebraska, with the mash-offs adding 12 new barns in the last year, all of them weaned to finish. The two biggest drivers have been using available manure as fertilizer and providing additional income to bring family members back to the farm. This month's issue says that's the case for John Tyson, who refers to his family's new hog barn as the Little Fertilizer Factory. To read more about Tyson's new hog barn and the increase in pork production in Nebraska, you can check out the October Nebraska Farmer. As we told you when we visited South America last year, Argentina's agricultural production is dramatically impacted by governmental policies that influence what Argentine producers choose to grow. That country is now in the midst of a presidential election, one that could change the current tariff situation in Argentina. Alastair Stewart covers South American agriculture for DTN, is based in Sao Paulo. He joined us Thursday to explain how the two candidates running for president might change ag policy. We also talked with Alastair about planting progress and the size of Brazil's corn and soybean crops, but we started by asking for a recap of the election in Argentina.
Yes, we had the first round of the presidential election on Sunday, and we got a surprise result. It was universally anticipated that Daniel Scioli, the government candidate, would, if not win in the first round, at least show a substantial margin against the second place candidate, Mauricio Macri. In fact, what happened is it was much closer than most people anticipated, the difference being just 3% between the two, leading many people to think that Macri, who is a kind of pro-market, pro-agriculture candidate, has momentum and could well win in the second round vote, which is on November 2022.
Now the question that's obvious to viewers, what's the difference here to agriculture and how does it impact the U.S.?
The difference is not completely clear. Both candidates, Scioli and Macri, have committed to first devalue the peso. That's important because Argentina runs a kind of a two exchange rate system whereby you have the official exchange rate and the black market exchange rate. The Argentina soybeans are exported on the official exchange rate, which has led to great frustration amongst producers and also led them to stock large amounts of soybeans in anticipation that eventually the official rate will be devalued. As I said, both candidates had committed to devalue. The question is kind of how aggressively. The consensus is that Macri would be more aggressive and do that quicker. The other aspect is the export taxes and the export controls on grains that Argentina currently imposes. They have a 35% export tariff on soybeans and also a 20% tariff on corn and around that on wheat as well. Macri has committed to clear those as quickly as possible. He's gone on the record. Whereas Scioli has also said that he would look at reducing those, although he would be a lot less radical about doing that. So generally speaking, Argentine farmers will be pro-Macri for obvious reasons, because they're cutting away the taxes. How would this affect American farmers? Well, obviously, if you cut away the taxes, then you're making Argentine farmers more competitive. What, in fact, would probably happen if you reform this system is that Argentina would produce more corn and wheat, simply because they produce soybeans at the moment, because soybeans are much more liquid. Then comes so that, generally speaking, is what happened. And also, as I mentioned before, if you get rid of these the devaluation and get rid of tariffs, then obviously the Argentines would tend to sell off their stocks of soybeans.
Meanwhile, in Brazil, how much concern is there on the overall economy, and how is that impacting Brazil's president?
Yeah, well, the Brazilian economy is in a parlous state at the moment. Market projections estimate that the economy will contract by 3% this year, and they're also forecasting contraction of between 1.2 to 2% next year. Meanwhile, we've got inflation running at around 10%. That's a very difficult situation, and that is obviously not helping President Dilma Rousseff and her efforts to run the country. She's already embattled because of a corruption scandal that has enveloped her government around basically siphoning funds off from the state-owned oil company Petrobras. So, yeah, it's politically and economically, Brazil's in a very kind of delicate state at the moment.
Let's move into planting progress in Brazil. How are farmers doing down there?
Well, soybean planting has started slowly. That's the headline here. In Paraná, in the south, they've received abundant rains, and so the farmers there have actually planted quite quickly. But in the main soybean state of Mato Grosso, the spring rains haven't returned yet. And that has led to frustration amongst farmers, and they're substantially behind schedule. The good news for them is that I've been hearing that it's been raining this week in the state, and the longer term forecasts are for rains to stabilize over the next couple of weeks.
What do you expect for the overall size of both soybeans and then the second crop, which is likely going to be corn in a lot of cases?
Soybeans, the consensus on crop estimates for the 2015-16 year is somewhere between 102 million metric tons. Then afterwards, many producers actually put in a second crop of corn. That is going to probably come in somewhere in the region of 55, 56, although it's very early to predict that crop. We're hearing numbers from consultants talking about a 10 to 15% increase in second crop corn planted area, on top of surprisingly positive margins this year for both soybeans and corn.
Alastair says those positive margins in Brazil, a big exporter, are aided in part by a 33% decline this year in Brazil's currency against the U.S. dollar. As far as Argentina's presidential election, Alastair says the runoff vote will take place November 22nd, and the next president will take over December 10th. The first confirmation of the porcine epidemic diarrhea virus occurred more than 2 years ago, but the virus is still impacting pork producers across the country. 34 states have recorded a case of PEDv, including Nebraska. Positive tests this summer, though, were significantly lower than 2014, and the USDA believes it has a handle on how the virus initially entered the U.S. Recently, we talked with UNL's Bruce Brodersen in UNL's Veterinary Diagnostic Center to get an update on PEDv.
It's still circulating in the state, and there are continually new cases that arise, as well as reinfections or re-outbreaks in herds that have had outbreaks before. So,
what do we know about how it first got into the U.S.?
Well, there's been a report recently from the USDA about they did interviews of lots of people in the industry trying to track back where it came from, and did some testing of samples from before the outbreak, and they think it comes down to maybe containers that hold feed or ship feed from overseas. And it's these large tote bags or these flexible bags that are used, and they think that's maybe where it came from, or the most likely source of where it came from.
How much of a threat do you think this is as we start to approach cooler temperatures?
Well, it's always going to be a threat in the wintertime, like any of the other coronaviruses. Why TGE, for example, wintertime is always worse because the virus survives better in a colder environment. So it's going to crop up again. The reports right now for outbreaks there's not very many going on right now, but I'm sure that'll climb as the temperatures get colder.
Can you give me an update on what vaccines are available for producers?
Well, there's two vaccines. One is a fully licensed vaccine, and that's been around since I think 2014, June of 2014, and then there's also a provisionally licensed vaccine or conditionally licensed vaccine that's available as well, and I think that one will be fully licensed over time as they get more data to provide to the USDA.
They're both preventative?
Yes, and so the instructions for administration of that vaccine is to vaccinate the sows shortly before they farrow. That way they can transfer maternal antibody onto their pigs through colostrum.
Can you reinforce some of the biosecurity measures that producers should be taking on their farms?
Well, everything and anything they can do to limit exposure or limit tracking material back to their farms. With that USDA report just demonstrates how subtle or how hidden that virus can be, and so changing clothes, changing boot wear, anything you can do to prevent tracking it back, and cleaning equipment, cleaning trailers is another thing too.
While we followed this PEDv, we've also followed that swine delta coronavirus. What's the latest on that?
Well, that virus is out there as well. It's not as virulent a virus as PED. It doesn't cause as severe a disease, so the mortality rates are not as high as with PED.
Now, with this week's weather forecast, here's Nebraska Extension state climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast. Of course, during this past week, we had two precipitation events that moved through the region. The first one occurred during the midweek period that brought light precipitation to parts of western and northern Nebraska and more scattered precipitation across eastern Nebraska. Further to our north, we've seen more in the way of snowfall. We had snowfall reports coming out of the Dakotas, northern Iowa, Minnesota, and the western Great Lakes. And then, of course, the second system that came through during the late afternoon and evening hours of Thursday and spread precipitation northward during the day on Friday, and then, of course, exited the state as we got into the early morning hours of this morning. That once again brought some light snowfall to portions of the upper Midwest, including Minnesota and the western Great Lakes. Now, for Nebraska, we are not expecting any snowfall, at least in the immediate term, but there are signs out in the middle of late next week that there is a possibility that we could see some snowfall scattered in with the precipitation across the northern panhandle of Nebraska, and depending on how much cold air is in train, we could see that spread into the Sandhills region. So let's take a look at the upper air models and see what we have in store for this week. First thing I'll draw your attention to is the trough that brought the precipitation to our region has split its energy, so we have one piece of energy in the northern stream moving toward the upper Great Lakes region, where we'll see scattered rainfall and snowfall accumulations in the Great Lakes region, and the southern extent where we're seeing heavy precipitation falling across southern Texas, central Texas, and points to the east. Now, as the system moves to the east, we'll start to weaken somewhat as it moves up against this ridge in the southeast, but overall the precipitation for our region of the country has pretty much ended, and we will not see any more return of moisture for at least the next couple days. So a warming trend is in store. As we get into Sunday, which is tomorrow, we will basically see a zonal flow, and we will not see much in the way of precipitation, but a slight bump up of temperatures to what we expected to receive today. And then as we get into Monday, we start to see a trough moving into the western United States, and that's going to start building a ridge in advance of this trough, bringing a return to a southwest flow aloft and much warmer temperatures into our region. Not unheard of that we will see 70s widespread across southwest Nebraska, with upper 60s to 70s across southern Nebraska. Now, as we go into Tuesday, this system starts to get its act together and dropping some pretty significant precipitation in the inner basin region, but in advance of the very warm air is going to be drawn northward, and we should start to see our humidity levels increase somewhat, particularly Tuesday afternoon. Would not be surprised that we will see some low 80s across southwest Nebraska, but 70s to mid 70s look to be in store for the southern half of the state, with low 70s to upper 60s across extreme northeast and north central Nebraska. As we get into Wednesday, now the action starts to occur. As this trough starts to approach our region, the first piece of energy shoots up into the plains, bringing precipitation, scattered as it may be, across the western part of the state, and that will spread eastward as the day progresses as we get into Thursday. As we get into Thursday, the system starts to move across the region. We do see the heaviest precipitation across the eastern part of the state, but on the backside there may be enough cold air to generate a mix of rain and snow, particularly during the very tail end of the storm system. Now as we get into Friday, that system quickly exits and weakens as we go to the Great Lakes, and we're left in a cool pattern across the central plains, and that means substantially below normal temperatures. Now as we look at the temperature forecast for this week, we are looking for very warm conditions this weekend, with the warmest temperatures probably in the Monday to Tuesday time frame before a cold front starts to move its way into our region, bringing sharply cooler temperatures, particularly on Thursday, with highs primarily in the upper 30s in the northern panhandle and low 60s in the southeast, and then we cool down statewide well below normal temperatures, looking at temperatures between 41 and 50 across the state. If we look at the 8 to 14 day forecast from next Thursday to the following Tuesday, that warm air continues to be pushed toward the east as we see that cool air in association with that upper air trough to our west. In terms of precipitation, with that trough to our west, we continue to see additional moisture streams into our region. Now we have the latest 30-day and 90-day forecast. The 30-day forecast for the month of November indicates above normal temperatures to the north, normal to the south. In terms of precipitation, looks like above normal precipitation for the southern plains and the southern Rocky Mountains. And in terms of the 3-month forecast, once again above normal temperatures to our north. Nebraska's kind of caught in the between, with the best chance for above normal temperatures across the northern half of the state. And in terms of precipitation, above normal precipitation for the vast majority of the first half of the winter.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews are available individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on corn and soybean markets, concerns when letting cattle graze stalks, Argentina's presidential election, and the porcine epidemic diarrhea virus. As always, you can keep up with Market Journal during the week by following us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Next week, Ron Plain will join us to analyze hog markets. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.
You can stay connected with Market Journal during the week by following the show on our social media platforms. The Market Journal Twitter feed updates followers on USDA reports, weather conditions, and ag news. The Market Journal Instagram account shows viewers photos of our travels across the state, and the Market Journal Facebook page provides links to previous interviews you may have missed.